I record these introductions for my interviews right after I finish the interview. And I got to tell you, I am pumped up about this interview. My guest today is Mark Brooks. He is Managing Director at Permanent Equity. Permanent Equity is a company that invests in family-owned businesses for the long haul out of a 25-year, $300 million fund, rarely using debt. They love investing in boring businesses, so they're not like, venture capitalists looking for the latest app, but they do invest in companies like construction. And we have such a tremendous conversation about how to structure incentive programs. And we actually get into some insights that I'd never thought about before in terms of how incentive programs can impact your construction company positively. Think about the silos that exist in your business between project managers and between the field and the office. What if you could structure an incentive program to reduce those silos and to get your people working together as a team more effectively? We touch on that here in this discussion. Another key area that was a deep insight is right out of the gate when we talk about how to start with an incentive program and identify the outcomes you want from a position and use that as a way of structuring the roles and responsibilities for each person in your company. And that's a terrific insight. Mark really brings some clarity to that idea of how to structure an incentive program. And it is based off of an article, How to Optimize Your Compensation Plan, that is published on Permanent Equity's website. We link to it in the show notes. We link to the Permanent Equity website, as well as Mark's personal email where you can contact him if you have any questions. And of course, thank you for listening to Construction Genius. Make sure you're taking plenty of notes because you are going to get tremendous insights into how to structure an incentive program so that you give your employees what they want and you get what you want. Thank you for listening to Construction Genius today. Share the interview with anyone who you think would benefit from it. Give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Enjoy my discussion with Mark. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Mark, welcome to Construction Genius. You read an article on incentives, and so I'd like to spend today diving into incentive programs. I know for a lot of folks in construction companies, structuring incentives correctly is a great challenge. There's this issue they have with the difference between subjective measurements and objective measurements. And so I'd just like to kick off by asking you, why is a clear incentive program important?
Well, I think it's important because it is the most direct way that you can show someone how you want them to contribute to the organization. So you can give someone a very well-written job description, you can give them good coaching, but there's nothing that shows them the path towards what you actually want them to produce for the organization. Nothing stronger in that area than a clear compensation program. So you can tell them, hey, I want you to go out and do X, Y, and Z. But if your compensation program leads their behavior to produce A, B, and C instead, there's a ton of conflict there. So it doesn't matter how clear your job description is, your compensation plan is really what's going to guide their behavior and how they try to add value to your organization.
So that's very interesting there. So if I'm a company president, should I start by, instead of doing a job description, start by looking at an incentive program as a means of really describing what I'm looking for?
I think it would be a very compelling way to start to craft a role is what value do we want this person to add to the organization? How do we think this person is going to be successful? And that really, it really leads you to the discussion as an executive of what am I willing to pay for? And once you have decided what you want to pay for, that then can lead you to a more informed job description. So these are the behaviors that I'm willing to compensate for. And then you can very clearly lay out a job description after that. Eric, I haven't approached it that way myself before, but I think it's a really great idea.
That's so interesting, isn't it? I have never thought about that. And we're 30 seconds into the interview, and that's the first time because it's so much, you've got this sort of job description that's to a great extent generic. And yet, if you started that with the incentive program and built the job description off of that, that is very interesting.
I think it is very interesting. And if you can, and the more clear you could be with job candidates, they're actually going to help craft the role maybe even better than you could. Again, if you're being extremely clear with the outcomes that you're looking for from that role, I think you're actually going to find better talent and better fits for that role because people are going to understand what you actually want them to produce.
How interesting. So if you're clear on what you want them to produce, then that helps you to structure the incentive program, structure the job description, and find better talent and get better results.
I believe so.
Interesting. Okay, so let's explore incentives just a little bit more here. In your mind, what is the connection between human nature and incentives?
Sure. I believe that human nature is largely fixed, and we are programmed largely to look out for ourselves without any net of any outside influence. So if we are programmed to look out for ourselves, we're going to do things that are in our best interest. Right. And so in order to capture human nature and push it towards the outcomes that we're looking for from our companies, then we need to structure an incentive program that when they are being rewarded the most is when the company is getting the most of what it wants out of them. So we want to make sure that alignment is there between what drives the company forward and what meets that human need of looking out for themselves, for the well-being of their families, for the well-being of their communities around them. That's when incentives really work, is when I, as an employee, am feeling that I'm getting the most out of my work, when I am producing the most optimal outcome for my business.
Okay, so let's talk about that, because there feels like there's a little bit of tension there potentially, is that alignment of the company, what the company wants with what the employee wants. What are some good ways to get that alignment moving?
So I think a lot of it depends on where the person sits in the organization. So sometimes it can be very simple. So if you're talking about a field worker, you want to get the most out of them, per hour that they're on the job. Yep. And so that's a fairly easy alignment. If you're looking for someone who's maybe a project manager who's managing multiple projects, that gets a little more challenging, right? Because different projects have different margin profiles. They're with different customers. And so that's where incentive alignment can get a little bit trickier. Ultimately, you want the bottom line, whatever you consider that in your business, either earnings or free cash flow. You want, when that number goes up, you want your employees to feel rewarded from that. And, most of the time it doesn't make sense to make that direct tie, especially for a field worker or something like that. But as you move further up in the organization, the further and further down the income sheet, it makes sense for you to incentivize, if that makes sense. So,
okay, so let's talk about that, because I know you bring that up in your article, and that leads me to how to tailor incentives to different parts of the organization. So please describe what that idea of the different places in the organization where the incentive should occur.
Sure. So it comes down to the idea of what people feel like they have agency over. Mm-hmm. So if you're setting goals for an employee on which their compensation is based, and they feel like they have no control over that outcome at all, that's a bad incentive, right? It's going to drive bad behaviors, or at worst, it's going to cause despondency from the employee because, they feel like they can't drive any additional compensation for themselves. Right. So you want to be structuring incentives where people have agency. So, for example, if you're working in sales and your job as an individual contributor as a salesperson, you have basically no agency over things like capital expenditures, rent, other overhead sorts of items like that. What you really have agency over is sales, and that's it. So when you're kind of a frontline worker in sales, then keeping your compensation towards the top of the income sheet makes sense, right? So sales revenue being towards the top, that's where you want to incentivize those folks. As your responsibilities increase, in the organization, you do have more agency over things. You have more agency over gross margin. You have more agency over things that affect net margin, right? You take on more responsibilities for overhead, for things in OpEx, that sort of thing. So as your scope increases at the business, then your incentives should be based further down the income sheet because you have more agency over those items further down the sheet, right? So that's kind of how we think about that.
So one way potentially then for me to think about the structuring of the incentives is simply to take a look at my incentive sheet and talk about and ask myself, where does the person who I'm thinking about structuring an incentive program for, where do they have the most impact? And then build the incentive around where they sit on the income sheet.
That's right. You essentially don't want to be in a situation where you're incentivizing people over areas where they have no control.
Right.
So looking at that income sheet and saying, yes, they do have input on this. They have input on this. Oh, they don't have input on this, this, and this. So maybe we should carve that out for them. So I'm going to create, so say you've got an operational manager. They do have control over a lot of overhead, but say they're not involved in the CapEx process, right?
Yep.
So you could create an incentive for that person that says, I'm going to compensate you on net margin, net of capital expenditures, right? So I'm going to carve out CapEx because when I want to build a new warehouse, I don't want to penalize you for making that decision because you had no agency in that decision.
Okay. So with that in mind, how do you balance incentives to control for negative behavior? So for instance, if you're incentivizing someone to sell, they may sell either to the wrong clients or they may sell in the wrong way. How do you balance that?
Yep. So a lot of times those very top line numbers get very dangerous for that reason, right? Yeah. Because if I'm responsible for sales, I can go sell to a bunch of bad clients who are never going to repeat with us, or people who are friends of mine, or even family, which is even worse, right? And it creates these bad incentives. So what we typically try to do in his book, the name is going to escape me. So in his book, High Output Management, Andy Grove, the former CEO of Intel, lays out the idea of managing incentives in pairs, right? Metrics in pairs. So one that's a growth measure that's in volume, and another that is a rate. So as an example of that is we're going to measure gross sales, and we're also going to measure a refund rate or a rework rate or something like that. And we're going to measure those things together. The best metrics are the ones that combine those. So if you're in sales and you have a sales rate and a rework rate or a refund rate, and you net those out, we're going to compensate you, Eric, our salesperson, on net sales, not on gross sales. Or we're going to incentivize you on net sales, and we're going to give you a royalty on repeat business from that new customer that you bring in. So we'll give you 10% of new contracts. We'll give you 1% of every subsequent contract after that. So you're highly incentivized as a salesperson that way to go find repeatable business, to find those good customers and sign contracts with them.
Excellent. So you can be looking for pairs of metrics or maybe 3 metrics that give you a full picture of someone's performance and incentivize across a balanced spectrum of behavior. Is that what I'm hearing correctly?
That's right. And your initial question was around how do I prevent this from our incentive plan from leading to bad behavior?
Yeah.
And in my opinion, the best way to do that is to get really creative yourself, which is, either by yourself or with a, group of trusted leaders sitting down and saying, if I wanted to maximize my personal output from this compensation plan, consequences be damned, how would I do it?
Yeah.
And you can find, again, this is the human nature part, right? You can get really creative about how to game those systems. So before you roll out a new compensation plan, sitting down and figuring out how you yourself would game that system can help you find those failures, those problems in the system before you actually roll them out.
Yeah, that's interesting. So for instance, just as a side note to folks in construction, When you're measuring your project managers, you may measure them on whether their projects come in on time, whether they come in with the quality, how much rework they have, and you'll also measure them on the safety. But all those three things need to play in to account when you are bonusing your project managers. You just wouldn't take one, because if all you're doing is bonusing them on the speed of producing a project or finishing a project, then you might jeopardize the other things such as safety and quality.
Yep. And another thing to keep in mind, since you mentioned project managers specifically, yes, is if you're in the type of business where project managers need to shift resources to projects outside of themselves.
Oh yeah.
Making sure that you're incentivizing not just for their personal output, but for the output of the company writ large can be very important also. Because if you're only incentivizing your PM for the projects that they are operating, then they are highly disincentivized to share resources, to share knowledge, to share equipment, those sorts of things. So making sure that a decent portion of their incentive comp is at the broad firm level, the company level, helps encourage them to be a helper to the people around them, the other PMs.
Okay, so I have to stop here, Mark, and I just have to put on the red flashing light for what you just said. Okay.
Okay.
Because I know I spend so much time talking to my C-level clients about the conflicts their PMs have with sharing resources, and that insight there about tying the company's achievements and bonusing the PMs, even if they don't have direct control over every element of the company's achievement. That is very good.
Yeah, and I think it also incentivizes them to share not just resources but knowledge also. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're hiring really good PMs, they're going to realize, hey, I see this problem that's going on with their project. I've played that game. I know how to fix that. I'm going to take them out to coffee, take them out to lunch, and help them work through that, right? Because that PM is going to help my bonus also, right?
That's right.
So it's not an either or proposition. We definitely still want to incentivize those people on the work that they're doing on their particular projects, but making sure that there's more of a global incentive also for them to go outside of themselves, outside of their team, to share the resources and knowledge is also incredibly important.
So here's a great question for people listening. How can you structure your incentives to minimize the natural silos that occur between the field and the office, between estimating and project management? What can you do to get creative in that way so that everyone in the organization is pulling for the goals of the company?
Right. So the way that we talk about this is we are always willing to take a smaller piece of a much larger pie. Uh-huh. So being willing to share in the broader firm's outcomes is an important aspect of this. And again, the balance is really going to depend on each individual company, which I think brings us to the topic of back testing your incentive structure. Uh-huh. So let's assume you have the last 3 to 5 years of your financials, mm-hmm, and maybe even some project specific metrics. And if you were to go back and look, say I want to roll out this new incentive structure for my PMs, let's say, I can go back and say, okay, for this PM, how would this balance between overall firm profitability and individual project profitability work out for them? How much would they have earned in 17, 18, 19, 20? How much will they earn in 21, right? So I think a lot of times the temptation is we get these ideas about incentive plans and we want to roll them out, but we actually have a lot of great historical data at our fingertips of how to test these incentive systems and see how they're going to work out in the future, right? So it's not just important to backtest on an individual employee level, but at a broader firm level too. So if you create an incentive plan, running yourself through a few metrics of, okay, if I had a 50% down year in revenue, am I still, based on this incentive plan, paying out massive bonuses to people based on the metrics that I've laid out in here, right? So really like stress testing those incentive plans and making sure they're not going to break you in the downtimes. Like construction is cyclical, right? We're going to have down years, and we need to make sure that our incentive plans are good enough to keep people around during the lean times, but doesn't dramatically overpay them to the point where we're risking the solubility of the company in the process.
All right, so there's another red flashing light, dude, because you just talked about something that people struggle with. They're paying out these massive bonuses when they had a crap year. You need to fight against that. But what's interesting to me here is the need to be thoughtful about the incentive program because of this idea of taking a smaller piece of a much larger pie. Because when we began talking, we talked about human nature being essentially selfish. And the leadership of the company needs to be able to clearly articulate how those broader goals are tied to the self-interest of the individuals.
That's right. And I think one of the biggest challenges, especially as you move towards field employees in construction, is being able to convey long-term and deferred compensation. Right. So that's a very large challenge, because what a line worker is typically going to do is look at your hourly rate versus this guy's hourly rate and make their employment decision based on that. Right. Especially in times where the labor market is extremely tight.
Yep.
People are looking for shortcuts on how to make those decisions. So, we don't talk about this much in the article, but it's extremely important that you are very, very clear in communicating the total value of the compensation package that you've put together for someone. So if you're laying out for them, hey, I want to pay you this as a foreman, let's say,
yep,
and you want to make absolutely sure, if you're giving them a company truck, you need to assign a value to that
right
on the offer letter that you're giving them, right? Or if you're giving them a truck allowance or something like that, or
yep,
if you're going to give them more vacation days than industry average, put a dollar value on it and put it on the piece of paper, right? There's a great need, especially as you get into field work, to be extremely articulate about the full value of your compensation package, or else it loses its ability to attract the right people.
Excellent. And so there's another takeaway right there for the listeners, is to put down in writing, clearly explaining the value of every aspect of the incentive and benefits that you're providing for people, so they understand that.
Yep, that's right. Put your best foot forward.
Excellent. And by the way, we are linking in the show notes to the article, which is called How to Optimize Your Compensation Plan. So if you're frantically taking notes, which you should be, that's good. But you can also read the article and get much of what we're talking about here. Now, let me explain a scenario to you, Mark, and give me some feedback. I'm at the end of the year. I'm the president of my construction company. I look at my profits coming in. I'm like, man, we had a pretty good year. And so let's say Dave is going to get 10 grand, Susie's going to get 30, and Fred's going to get 100. And it's just kind of off the top of my head. And then next year we have a kind of a down year. And so Dave's going to get 0, Susie's going to get, 5 grand, and Fred's going to get a pat on the head. How do we remove the subjective element from the incentive program and make it more objective and rational? Yep.
So I think being very clear with how it ties back to company metrics, whether they're financial or otherwise, is extremely important. And you hit a good point on compensation that is subjective, particularly around those end of year bonuses, annual bonuses, holiday bonuses.
Yep.
They can feel really good in the moment, except for when people have already baked them into their mental expectation of what they're expecting to get, right? So
yes.
Let's think about National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, right? Clark Griswold has this very clear idea that he's going to build a pool with his holiday bonus, right? And he's fantasizing about the pool and the people that are going to come over to the pool and all those sorts of things. And then he gets this really disappointing bonus check. That's actually not really a check. I think it's a membership to like a Jams and Jellies club or something like that. So anyway, and he's devastated, right? So, but in Clark's world, fictional though it may be, there was no metric on which he had based his expectation for that bonus, right? And it was probably based on last year, right? Most employees are going to say, my holiday bonus was this last year. My holiday bonus is going to be this year. When we actually set those bonuses on a particular company metric, and then we communicate very clearly and very regularly where we are on that metric, people's expectations stay in check, right?
Yes.
So what we have found in experience is that the one-time surprise bonus check, the benefit of that wears off within a few weeks, right?
Yes.
And it creates that expectation for the next one and the next one and the next one. Whereas if you can just meet people's expectations on a very regular basis, that has a much more profound effect on their retention as an employee than does the one-off big surprise, right? So say what you're going to do and then do it over and over and over again, and you will keep people around for a very long time. So to your point about the subjective nature, making sure that Alice and Joe and Susie understand, hey, you're going to get X% of this metric, and then every month saying, this is where that metric is. This is where that metric is. This is where that metric is. And so they can do that math in their head and say, I know what my check is going to be. And the other thing is, as a manager, all the work and all the stress of like, who do I give what? And I don't know, like they did this and so did this, and I don't know. All that work has already been done for you. All you have to do is do what you said you were going to do and give them X% of this metric, right? For each of them. Again,
let's just stop. I want to make sure that we're clear here. First, you have to articulate the expectation and what people are going to be bonused for clearly so they understand it. You then have to simply meet that expectation.
Right. And I think it doesn't eliminate your latitude as a manager or as an executive to give people bonuses for a job well done on a specific project, or that they had to take an extended period of time away from their family to tackle a project that was far from home, or something like that. Like I'm not saying don't do those things. What I am saying is, again, back to the human nature argument, is once you've gotten one or two or three of those, you're already, as a human, baking it into your base pay.
Yes,
right?
You are.
It's now part of your salary. So that's the challenge with those. Is they're rare is the employee who takes one of those and says, that was amazing, that was an incredible experience, I'd never expect to get one of those again. And then when you get your next one, you're like, oh my goodness, I'm so surprised I got another one, right? I mean, you and I both know that's not how it works. Once you get one of those, you're like, oh, okay, well, if I do this thing, I'm going to get another one of those special bonuses, right? So I think consistency and clarity in your compensation plan is more valuable than the occasional surprise.
Yep. And then the other C there, just to throw it in there, since we're on the C's, is the communication. And I noticed that you repeated a couple of times monthly.
Yes. And really it depends on the company.
Yep.
It could be more frequent than that.
Right. It could be.
I tend to think less frequent than that gets dangerous. 3 months is an eternity.
Yes.
And I know that construction projects can go for many, many years, but lots can change in 3 months, even at a very large general contractor, right? Yep. So I think being clear with people at least monthly, especially on those metrics that are driving their compensation, keeps them linked to those things. And it also, like, one of the things that we didn't really get into very specifically in the article is the proximity of reward to work.
Let's talk about that.
So the further away a reward is from the work that was done, the more challenging it is in our brains to tie those two things together, right? Mm-hmm. So if you do a great job on something and I give you money for it now, that is much more impactful reinforcement than you do a great job now and I wait until December 15th to pay you for that, right? Yeah. So annual bonuses can be dangerous in that sense too, in that if someone just completely killed it for the company in January and February on a major project, and they're literally waiting 10 months to get their bonus payout for that, that's a really long time. And the disconnect starts to get created there between the work that was done and the reward for that work. So I would say communication at least monthly. And I would say if you have a project-based reward system or compensation system, making sure that you close that out regularly also. I'm not saying necessarily monthly, but at least quarterly, making sure that people are sharing in the profits that they generated for the company. Otherwise, there's that really long lag time between work and reward that starts to create a disconnect.
Okay, so then what I'm hearing is that I need to do, if I'm the CEO of my company, I need to do some hard work around the amount of the compensation, because I might reduce the amount of the reward if I'm doing them more frequently. And then I must also tie that to money that I've already secured, because sometimes where things get messy is if I bonus someone on something that I haven't even got paid for yet. And that's dangerous, obviously, because then you might be thinking, well, can I get that money back later on?
Yes, right. Yeah, and you can't take money back from employees.
Yeah, right.
So, yeah. It's very true, and I think that's another reason that very frequent communication is important, right? So if you have a very large contract and a late paying customer, making sure that your employees understand, hey, we share in this together. We are co-owners of this outcome, and then you actually get employees interested in helping you solve that problem, right? If someone's 120, 150 days out from payment, that starts to impact the people who are involved in that project, not just you as the owner or the executive.
And it's very interesting there too as well, because you might think about in construction, let's say you have tasked your accounts receivable folks with the task of chasing around your clients to get paid. Perhaps you might think about actually incentivizing your project managers with the speed of payment, because that might then incentivize them to get in contact with the owner or with the GC more frequently, because they have deeper relationships and perhaps get things moving more quickly.
That's right. And it also, I would say, on the controlling the negative side of that, it incentivizes them to be a good employee of that general contractor, right?
Yeah.
So the more strained they're making that relationship with the way they conduct themselves on the job site, then the less likely the people, that trickles up, right? Like
Yes.
people know who the good subs are and the bad subs are.
Yep.
And I'm guessing, I haven't done a study on this or anything, but I'm guessing payment timelines sync up with that pretty well, right? So if your PMs understand and your foreman and senior foreman understand that their pay comes when you get paid, then their behavior on the job site is going to reflect a genuine care for the outcome of the project, for the people around them, because that trickles up and affects your pay schedules.
Yeah, and so that is let me just make another bookmark here for folks. Think about your PMs who are get paid quickly and the PMs that don't. Make sure that you're tying some kind of incentive to that speed of payment. You know how important that is for your cash flow, and make sure that you're incentivizing the guys who go out there and get you paid, because that can really help in terms of retaining those kinds of talented project managers.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk about the idea of tying incentives, structuring incentives correctly so they're actually achievable. Because sometimes, you might have this goal that's way out there and it's a bunch of money, but there's no way I'm going to get there. So how do you do that?
Right, and I think the outcome of an incentive plan like that is really similar to the ones where people feel like they have no control. Right. So we talked about like incentivizing a salesperson with with something that includes capital expenditures, right? Yeah. Like I have no control over that. There's no point in even trying. Right. So same thing with even if someone does have control over the particular area you're incentivizing them on, but the target for them is so outlandish, it creates this sense of a lack of control, and people will stop trying. Yeah. So I think, but it's a very delicate balance for executives and leaders. Is we are charged, part of our job is to get people excited about big goals, right? We we're called to be people who are getting people excited about the next big thing, about the next big initiative. But at the same time, we can't create incentives for people that are completely out of their grasp, because it actually turns out to be disincentivizing for people, right? So achievable goals. And, I think one important aspect of this is, let's say you've won a contract that's actually going to last 3 years or something like that. Being able to chop up your incentive for a very long dated payout for people is an important aspect of that. So we can say, hey, I want you to PM, I want you to go out and I want you to own this multi-million-dollar 3-year contract, right? And I'm going to give you X at the end of that contract. 3 years is a long time to wait to get paid, right? You're not waiting to get paid for 3 whole years, right? You're not putting the whole thing in retainage until the end, right? So making sure that you're flexible enough to say, I want you to take this 3-year job and I'm going to pay you X% each time I get paid.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Each time money comes in from me, money goes to you, and that makes people more willing to take on those big, huge projects as opposed to less willing when they're like, well, I'm going to take on this 3-year project. You spend 3 years of my life doing this. I'm not going to get paid until the end, right? Making sure that you chop that up into achievable goals for them so that they can again benefit when you benefit.
No, I like that. Let's move towards here the process. So let's start from the baseline. Let's say I don't have a really strong incentive program in place. Can you give me some first steps that I should take in order to begin to build that program?
Sure. I would say a good incentive program, if you're starting from ground zero, should start with the people that you are most interested in retaining.
Okay.
So typically that's going to be your inner circle of managers, or if you're a smaller shop, your foreman or senior foreman.
Yep.
So starting with those folks and then working your way down from that level of the organization, I think is smarter. The reason for that is a couple. One is for folks that you want to retain, the sooner you get something in their hands from an incentive plan perspective, the better off you are, right? The more likely you are to retain them. And the second is, as you move down the organization, there are more and more people at each level if you have a traditionally structured organization. So your mistakes compound as you go down the organization, right? So if I have this incentive structure that I want to try for a senior foreman and I have 3 of those,
right,
as opposed to I have 65 people in the field and I roll out something to them at the beginning. So if you're getting started, it's better to start with lower, more important headcount,
right,
than higher headcount, less important from a retention perspective. So as you're kicking off, start with those people that you're most interested in retaining. The other thing is with those people, you probably have a better relationship with them already.
Yes.
And if you have that relationship, you can go to them and say, hey, I am interested in giving you some incentive pay. I'm going to make some mistakes in this process, and I apologize for those up front, but please be patient with me and let's figure this out together. And you can start to have that trust conversation with them, and they'll give you some grace. It's much harder when you're the CEO and you're 4 levels above the people whose pay you've just screwed up, right? So starting off with that level where you have the higher trust relationship and saying to them, we're going to try this together. I may make mistakes on either side. Please be patient with me. But I really am interested in you sharing more of the upside of this business since you're the one helping me build it.
Yeah, I really like that. So start with the people you're interested in retaining, make it collaborative. Just going back to what you said earlier, tie it to what they can control.
Yes.
I really do think there's such an interesting conversation. So let's say, again, you're the CEO of the company. You've got someone who's your chief estimator, someone who's your chief operating officer, and someone who's your CFO. And obviously, those are 3 silos in your construction business that often have challenges. And we talked earlier about structuring the program so that those silos are reduced as much as possible. And then that idea of pay when you get paid. That's an interesting one that we've kind of articulated here.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, typically it's referred to as profit sharing.
Yeah.
That can be kind of a bigger, scarier phrase. But I think pay when you get paid is a little bit simpler. And people understand it. And it works at a bunch of different levels, right? The PMs, if you're incentivizing them based on their projects, you pay them when that project collects a payment, or you pay them monthly based on the projects that they are working on have collected payment, or even quarterly. I don't think quarterly is too long of a wait between work and reward. I think thinking through ways to do that, because then it's all about aligning those incentives, right? Like you want people to get the maximum reward when the company is doing its maximum work, right? Earning its maximum profit. So the better you can align those things, the better off you're going to be.
A couple of other points I just want to make is I really like how you said it. If you're beginning it from ground zero, or if you've tried it and you've screwed it up, have a little bit of humility and let people know either that you have screwed it up and you want to fix it, or you're going to screw it up, but you are willing to make changes as you go through the process.
Right. And I think it's really easy for employees, and this goes way beyond compensation, for them to assume that anything we say as executives in their company is the final word. Everything feels immutable and etched in stone. And so the more we can give ourselves latitude to change things, hey, this is something we're going to try, or we're doing this as a test, or this is a pilot program, that sort of thing. It gives us a tremendous amount of flexibility that we don't ordinarily have if we just go to them and say, here's this new thing, right? And then people assume, okay, it's set in stone. This is the new way of doing things. Nothing can be changed. So I think whether you're talking about compensation or really anything as an executive, making sure that people know that you are aware that you are fallible, that you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to need to come back and fix those is just an important part of management in general.
That's right. And then I think another important point, I just want to reiterate this, is that if you give these sort of surprise bonuses that are unexpected, you must understand that what was once unexpected becomes expected, and that then you're going to have to manage.
That's right. And managing expectations down, especially when it comes to compensation, is something that you never want to get into as a manager, for those of us that have had to gone through that.
That's excellent. So there's three takeaways I've just written down here for the positive impact of a good incentive program. Number one, you can retain your key people. Number two, and I think this is a subtle one that I'm just thinking about as we're having this conversation, a well-structured program for a construction company will help to reduce the silos that are between various departments of your company, and even reduce the friction between your project managers that are sharing resources. That's a key thought. And then obviously a well-structured incentive program can help to improve performance. Okay, Mark, I really appreciate your time. Tell us a little bit more about what you do and how people can get hold of you if they'd like to.
We are technically a private equity company, but we're very, very different in that we have a very long dated view on the partnerships that we enter into. We are investing out of a 27-year fund as opposed to the traditional 10. So when we go out and partner with a company or buy a company, we are doing so with the idea of basically never selling. Right. The other interesting distinctive from us is we typically don't use debt in our transactions. So we're not levering up a company. We're not saddling it with a bunch of debt payments at the beginning, which again, in the construction industry is key, right? We've already talked about how they are cyclical, and increasing your fixed costs in a construction company is not something that we want to come in and do at the beginning.
Okay.
So that's kind of the distinctives of what Permanent Equity does. My job here at the firm is over post-close operations. So after we have entered into partnership with the company, it's my job to make sure that they're well resourced, that they have good, smart people to talk to about challenges that they're facing. I actually help manage some of the companies that we have as a portfolio partner. So I'm kind of the board in a box for some of our executives.
Excellent.
So it's a great job. It's really fun, and we have really enjoyed partnering with a number of companies in the construction industry also already.
So then, if I'm a construction company owner or CEO, and perhaps I'm looking to cash out of the business or to sell the business, you might be someone that we would that we could contact about that.
We would love to talk to you. Yes, my email address is mark@permanentequity.com. You can send me an email directly, or you can go to our website, which is permanentequity.com, and you can read more about the firm.
Beautiful. Links in the show notes. Mark's email will be in the show notes as well. Mark, I always like to ask my guests, you're in Missouri, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, now, I don't know Missouri that well, got to be honest, but if I was visiting, is it Columbia, Missouri?
That's right.
Favorite place to eat? Hit us with your restaurant recommendation.
I've got to go with the Barred Owl. So it is a butcher shop that has a restaurant connected to it. So
that sounds
you're
good.
You're gonna come visit us in Columbia, Eric, and you're gonna have the best charcuterie you've ever had. I promise.
Oh, hit that. The Barred Owl Butcher and Table.
That's it.
Oh, I just found it. Okay, good. So we will link in the show notes to the Barred Owl Butcher and Table. Mark, you've been extremely generous. I'm going to link in the show notes to the article, How to Optimize Your Compensation. This has actually been a lot of fun. I think we had a nice chat and got some stuff out of this that I hadn't thought about before. So I know there's going to be tremendous value for people who are listening to this. I appreciate your generosity.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on, Eric. It's been really fun.
Awesome. Today's episode was brought to you by the Construction Conclave. If you as a construction leader would like to develop your skills and get involved in a community of like-minded construction professionals who are focused on building healthy teams, profitable projects, and long-term successful businesses, then the Construction Conclave is for you. It's a private, invitation-only group of construction leaders that are focused on developing their leadership skills. We do training every single month online that looks at how to become a better leader in a very practical, straightforward way. We also have other events that build community and camaraderie so that you can associate with others who are interested in developing their skills as leaders. If you'd like more information and to see if you qualify for participating in the conclave, feel free to reach out to me, eric@ericanderton.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and thanks again for listening.